Hello everyone, this is Nathan from Snap and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. This is the second of two webinars focusing on reporting, so if you missed the first one, I'd certainly recommend popping over to our support hub where you will find a video of part one. As with the first one, I'm going to be covering some fairly intricate steps, so please do make use of the recording as well as the one from before. In part one, we looked at taking your previously created tables, charts, lists and clouds and adding them to a report which could be run off at any time of day or night. We also discussed using text grids alongside images to draw out your key data. Today, we'll add some more dynamic content to your report, looking to actually interrogate the data rather than just displaying the tables and charts. A quick reminder as to the general flow of creating reports. We start off by building the tables and charts that you wish to include in your report. Depending upon your required content, this will invariably involve creating some derived variables, allowing you to simplify your analysis for the end user. We then build those tables and charts into your report, layering them as you go and potentially adding some commentary in between. Once set up, your reports are ready to run any time of day and night and will always include the latest data. A few key benefits to creating your reports in Snap. First of all, you can create your analysis and reporting before your project has gone live. So if you've got a survey running for 3 months, you can spend that time creating those reports rather than panicking on day 90 that you've just got a couple of days to get everything sorted. Your tables, charts, lists and reports are all updated in real time. So if you were to run a report at 3 AM and someone's completed the survey at 2:55 AM, it will include their data. So to confirm, you can run the report at the end of the project. Equally, you can run the reports throughout the project. With smart reporting, we can add dynamic content and commentary to your automated reports, giving them that personal handwritten feel. And another great reason for creating your reporting in Snap is the ability to have one single report which can be used to mass produce multiple bespoke reports based upon areas, departments, teams, or any other aspect that you require reporting on. So for example, if you need to create an individual report for the different departments in your company, you actually just create the one report in Snap, and that report might then generate perhaps 7 bespoke reports, all tailored to the individual department. Now, the plan today is to look at including the top and bottom 3 performing areas from a larger list of categories, using images to quickly focus your attention. We're then going to look at what's known as conditional inclusion. This allows you to set parameters as to when content appears in your report. So it could be a passage of text, maybe a table or chart, or in my example, I'm going to be using different images based upon set targets. Next, we'll look at to include dynamic commentary to the report, which updates based upon the data in a corresponding table, and in my case, also performs calculations based on that data. And then to finish off, I'll be showing you a little bit of something called context, which has got many uses within Snap. Today, I'll be using it to mass produce a bespoke report for each venue, but I'll also point you in the direction of a few other uses that you may find useful. Okay, let's head into the software to begin. So we're going to be using the in-crowd conference survey, which if you've watched many of our webinars recently, you're probably familiar with. It's got 321 cases or completed surveys within that survey. And if I go straight ahead and run a quick preview of the questionnaire, just to show you which questions we're looking at today. So we've got a number of simple sort of yes, no tick box questions or single response, and you can see there's routing based on those as well. We have some map controls. This one's actually a multiple response map control. Got some single response or satisfaction type questions. I'd imagine most of your questionnaires would have some kind of rating scale question in there. So we've got quite a few rating scale questions. Got some quantity response questions as well, sort of how much did you spend? So basically a little bit of everything really. And as with the webinar last time, we're going to be focusing on running reports for the different venues. So in my case, I've got 4 different venues, so ultimately we're going to end up with 4 different reports. Now, let's take a look at the report which we're going to be running today. So if I close my preview down, and I'll close down the design window and head into the reports icon. Got a number of different reports today, but we're going to be focusing on mainly report number 2. So I'll go straight ahead and press play on that one and just run a quick preview. Now, I should say that in part 1, I discussed the importance of creating a good looking report, which is easy to understand and also flows for the reader. To try and keep this report as simple as possible, I'm going to be using the same report as before, and to a certain extent I've shoehorned in an extra page. And having added this additional sort of content and stuff, ideally I would perhaps give my report a bit of a shuffle just to sort of make sure that the flow of content is as sort of reads correctly. But in lieu of simplicity, today I've just popped all my new content on this one page. But moving back to page number 1. So page 1 looks a little bit like a dashboard or perhaps a poster. The main satisfaction question at the beginning. In the middle, I've drawn out the 3 key indicators alongside some images. And then at the bottom, we've got a sort of trend chart tracking back the last sort of previous 2 years. Now, page 1, this was all covered in the previous webinar, so we won't be looking at that one today. If I move on to page 2, this is the one we're going to be focusing on today. We begin at the top by picking out the top 3 performing areas. So that's a top 3 from a range of about sort of 10 different sort of rating scale questions. In the middle, we've got 3 sort of data boxes with some data looking at the general satisfaction levels and also how likely or unlikely people are to recommend us. And I've added some images into these sort of text boxes or text grids. The idea being that as I move throughout the different reports, you'll see that I have different images appearing. So in this case, I have a thumbs up appearing because my data is above my target of 65. If I just scroll through to the next report, which is for Manchester, you can see I then have a thumbs down because I'm below that 65% threshold. Likewise, I've got different sort of thresholds on the second and third data charts. Below these, I've added a little bit of extra detail, sort of breaking down to give a bit of more sort of greater understanding to the sort of key line data. And then right at the very bottom, we have a table, which I've added some sort of colour and some sort of highlighting to, just to sort of focus the attention. And then down the bottom, we're using what's known as cell referencing to pick out some sort of key information. And also down on the very sort of bottom line, we're actually interrogating the data. So I'm working out the sort of differences between certain bits of data and what sort of percentage difference that will be. Moving on to page 3, this is just a more sort of detailed page looking at various things, but picking out sort of the top 5 categories. I've got a word cloud at the bottom, looking at the general comment questions, and we had a question which is describe or give us 3 words to describe the conference. And then at the end, we've got the general the comment questions. Again, pages 3 and 4, they were all covered in the previous webinar. Okay, and just a reminder that as I then move on, it jumps on to the next report, which is then for Cardiff. So today I've got 4 different reports built into one. Now, for the time being, I'm going to close down this preview. And we can then start looking to see how the report was built. So if I go into report number 2, we can see we've got a number of different instructions. Again, we covered a lot of this in the previous webinar, but you can see starting off with a general sort of page layout, specifying sort of how the report's going to look. And then we've got the sort of executions, which is actually running the saved or previously saved tables and charts. If I run the report again, but this time selecting the checkbox at the bottom, just preview that one, you can then get a better idea of how these different items on the report are built. So got little reference numbers next to them, which relates back to the reference numbers just on the side. Now, I've actually got a PDF of this report already on my desktop, so I'm going to go and open that one up. If I just zoom in, as I said, we're going to focus on page 2. So to begin with, we're going to start looking at the top and bottom 3 performing areas. So you can see the reference number is 27 and 29. Now, if I go back into the survey, so number 27 and 29, but you notice that just above that I've got a page layout saying 3 columns. So again, I did briefly mention this last time, but often it's useful just to have sort of like a spacer. So yes, I've got 3 columns with 2 items in it, but there's actually a third hiding in the middle. So that's column number 1, column number 2 in the middle, and column number 3 at the end. But focusing more on number 27. So this is a text grid. So text grid of 2 columns, 1 column, 2 column, and 4 rows. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've just added a little bit of color just by going into the edit, the right click and edit. And so my top row has got it's called the face, but basically the color. But more importantly, we're looking at some cell referencing. So I'm just going to move this one over there. So we've got some dynamic text in there. And this is actually pointing off to a table called H satisfaction, which is a pretty ugly looking table. No one's ever going to see it. But if we go into my saved tables and charts, so H satisfaction, we go into the properties of that one. So we're looking at the data from question 5 A, B, C, D, all the way down to Q5J, which is the original sort of very good to very poor, but we're more focusing on this % satisfied. And what that's doing is actually categorizing or grouping together the 2 positive options to give me that extra column at the end. And just to confirm how we've done that, that's using the summary statistics tab. And I'm making use of the confidence bottom box, or sorry, top box. And I'm looking at the first 2 categories, so the very good and good, out of the potential 5, and I've given it a header of % satisfied. And then I've sorted my chart based on this end column. And then in my report, you can see it's looking at H satisfaction, which is the name of my table, but more importantly, row 1 label. So if I click on the word speaker, you can see down the bottom R1 label, and then on the end R1S1, so row 1 statistic number 1. Okay, so the reference numbers are down the bottom. Ultimately though, we can just right click and copy, and then right click and paste. Now just bear in mind, when you right click and copy, you do need to make sure you do a proper sort of right click and copy cell reference. If I was just to do a Control C, it would actually copy the entire table. So you can do a Control V to paste, but you need to do an actual copy cell reference to copy it in the first place. Okay, so I've basically picked out the top 3 and also obviously the top 3 figures as well. And then again, just to sort of bring it to life, I've just inserted just a couple of images. And then obviously I've done exactly the same idea for the bottom 3. This time, again, you can see I've used a red color at the top. See different icons, different images as well. But this time looking at the L satisfaction. L satisfaction, exactly the same idea, still looking at questions 5A to J. This time looking at the bottom box. And just to sort of point out how sort of useful this is, you can see it's out of 5 categories. Often when you've got sort of satisfaction type questions, you have the annoying sort of no opinion or not applicable. That's good to have from a questionnaire design point of view. It's rather annoying when it comes to your analysis. So if there was a 6th category in there, you'd only be calculating the first 5. Okay, let's now turn our attention to the middle part of the report. So number 35, 39 and 42. Now again, it does look like there's just 3 columns there, but there's actually 7. So there's a spacer there, in the middle, and at the end. So there's 4 spacers and then 3 actual text grids. So if we go and look at number 35. So 35, yeah, there's my 7 columns and all my extra sort of blank spacers. But you notice that actually I have 2 of everything. So I've got 2 satisfied ones, I've got 2 likely ones and 2 unlikely ones. So if I go into the satisfied one, so again, just another text grid, this time 4 rows. There's a sort of mini row hiding there, and one there, and one there. Again, you can't really tell from here, no doubt, but the top row is green. The rest of the rows are actually a very pale grey. Just again, bring them off the page. But more importantly, still pointing off to some cell referencing, looking at this time a chart. So C, in my example, C stands for chart. So a chart based on question 4, and it's a donut. And just want to quickly sort of point out that normally, well, quite often use cell reference from a table. If I was to try and cell reference from a chart, I click on that number, it doesn't actually tell me what the reference number is. So it doesn't tell me the rows and columns. Now, obviously, I've used Snap quite a few years. I could probably have a good guess at sort of knowing that that's probably row number 1 and probably column number 1. But I wouldn't do that. I would quickly pop it back into a table just temporarily. And then we can see what the reference number is. But as before, just right click, copy, pop it back into a chart, and then paste it in as per normal. So yes, you can cell reference from a chart, that's no problem, but often it's easier to quickly turn it back into a table just to get those reference numbers. Now, if we look at number 35 and 36, they're actually exactly the same. The only difference really is that's got a thumb pointing down. That one has a thumb pointing up. And this is something called conditional inclusion, because we're going to say, depending on the data, depends on whether I want this one to appear or that one to appear. So we'll start off with the thumbs up. And it's a little bit like routing, to be honest. So in a questionnaire, you specify when questions are going to pop up. In here, we do it via an NA, or not applicable. So it is like routing, but actually it's the complete opposite. So routing is normally saying when will things pop up. This is actually saying when will they not pop up, or when will they not appear. So I've got a thumbs up. I want this whole text grid to appear, or in fact I don't want it to appear, sorry, if the data is less than 65. So yes, if my data comes out at less than 65%, I don't want to be saying it's doing well, because actually I've set that as a parameter to say it's not doing well. So likewise, if I look at the text grid for number 36, this time I got the thumbs down, but I don't want the thumbs down appearing if my data is over 64. So if it's 65 or more, then actually that's pretty good data. I don't want to be sending a thumbs up and thumbs down. I want to be showing people a thumbs up. So yeah, exactly like routing, just it's reversed in terms of the way it works. So I've then got different parameters on the likely to recommend. So I want the thumbs up. Again, it's pointing off to a different chart this time called recommend. And if the data is less than 50%, I don't want to be putting the thumbs up, and that's not good data. Likewise, if it is more than 50% or more, then again, I'm quite happy. So actually, I wouldn't want the thumbs down. And then again, I've got a slightly smaller threshold for the unlikely to recommend. So actually, if I've got more than 10 people not recommending us, yeah, that's not good news. So I'd be actually wanting to show them a thumbs down instead. So this idea, if I go back into the PDF a second, this idea of using images is a really useful way to convey your data and really draw focus to the person reading it. Because anyone reading the report can just really simply scan through the report, look out for any sort of thumbs down, which is actually bad data, and then having found the sort of the thumbs down, they can then look around that and hopefully gain a greater insight to that sort of why it's bad data. So yeah, I think we need to be realistic and realize that you've probably got 30 seconds of someone's attention when they're reading reports. Allow them to sort of scan through, pick out what they need to see, and then hopefully you can then pull them in to start looking at the more detailed data around that. Now, in my case, once you've pulled them in, we can then sort of provide some more data. So in my case today, I picked out the number of cases of where that percentage came from. So yeah, that 23% came from just 7 people giving a likely response, whilst that 42% came from sort of this breakdown of data. Now, again, you can do this in different ways. I've done this as text grids, so I've actually got 3 columns. So column 1 is my big spacer, column 2, column 3, but then I'm going to use 2 text grids, so number 46 and 47. And 47. So again, I tend to like using text grids because it just gives you a bit more control over sort of where things appear, and you can make sure that they do line up perfectly, as opposed to me trying to do it sort of pressing the space bar and moving things up and down sort of thing. So it's again just making use of sizing. So you can see column number 1 is, which is that one, is 1 centimeter. Column number 2 is 5 centimeters. And yeah, I've just obviously used different images just to again draw the eye and draw the attention to what people are looking at. Now, moving on to the last section on page 2. So we've got a chart, also in fact a table. So again, if we look at that table, so it's number 51. So this is an executed table. So again, just executing one of my previously saved tables and charts. Just to sort of remind you again the benefits of why it's an execution. I mean, you can drag and drop, but the benefit of being an executed table or chart means that if in sort of a couple of weeks time I decide to go into that chart or table and start perhaps editing it, maybe adding some different colors, changing the decimal places or whatever, then it means that any reports that that table or chart belongs to will update as well. Now today I've actually got reports 1, 2 and 3, and off the top of my head I think T5 ratings mean is actually in report number 2 and number 3. So yes, if I update it here, yes, it will update it in report 2, but it will also update it in report 3. In fact, while we're here, actually, a good little tip, if you've forgotten where that might be used, we have a little icon called View Sources and Dependents. And yeah, I can see that that chart is used, or that table is used in both those reports. And it's actually using those questions. But let's go into the actual table itself. So first of all, if we go into the properties, so again, I'm making use of the % positive and % negative, which was sort of merging together the 2 poor and very poor, and then the good and the very good. So as before, that is making use of the top and the bottom box, so the last 2 and the first 2. Slightly different this time is that I've included the confidence intervals, which is what's giving me the sort of plus or minus 5%, plus or minus 4%. What we've also got though is an average score, and that's making use of this sort of scoring system that I've got across the top. So where I've scored very good as 5 and very poor as 1. So it's adding up all the sort of scores, and that's the average score, and that's done using the mean. So I'm using what's known as a weight, so WT1. So if we go and look at WT1, which is a weight, I've specified that answer number 1, which is very poor, so very good, is worth 5 points, and answer number 5, which is very poor, is worth 1 point. So that's the sort of the scoring system. I've used that to sort of reverse the sort of scale, if you like. It's worth just pointing out though that if I double click on the word average score, the default text is actually normally, if I put it back to the default, is normally just mean. Now again, we talked a little bit about making your reports as sort of simple as possible to the end user. Instead, I've double clicked on it and just decided that actually average score might actually be more meaningful to people. So you can actually double click on any field and overtype it and change it as you like. Other things that I've done, again, just to maybe bring this table to life, under edit styles, just giving the main body the sort of background color. Again, you probably can't tell that's grey, but that is grey. But I've also and sort of made the grid lines sort of white rather than normal black. But what I've also done is added a little separator down the middle and added this sort of highlight. So again, that's just done by right clicking. Under options, you've got things like, do you want to get rid of the cell content? If I turn that one back on, that was sort of putting extra text up there, so I don't really want that. It's adding extra stuff which we don't really need. Plus we can turn off various columns and rows if we wish. But if I right click and go into separators, so if I talk about the columns, so first of all I've got spacing, so column number 8, so starting off with the total, that's column 1 all the way through, so number 8, you can see I've added a space, so that's that little gap down the middle. And then I've also highlighted column number 8 as well, and I've highlighted it green, again just to sort of save you sort of scratching your head to work out how I chose the colour. Under right click and edit, I've specified that anything I've asked to be highlighted will be highlighted that colour. Okay, so that was just a little bit about the sort of styling, and as I said, it's just to sort of try and say, point people to the key areas that you might be interested in. But more importantly, I'm talking here about the notes that I've got at the bottom, and I'm actually going to go and have a quick look back at the PowerPoint or PDF, sorry. Zoom in a little bit. So we're picking out some key information from this table. So it's picking out sort of whatever's at the top and whatever's at the bottom. You can see it's picking out networking and venue. It's also picking out the actual scores, so the average score and the bottom average score. So that's just done in exactly the same as we did earlier. We're just talking about sort of right clicking and copying and pasting it. But how you do these notes, there's kind of different ways you can do it, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it, but they each have their benefits. So I've done it, in my case, I've added it as an actual note to this individual table or chart, and you can do it under the notes icon. Equally, you can go under properties and do it under notes there. That's exactly the same feature, but it just involves having this extra window open. So I tend to do it under here. What I could have done though is perhaps added those notes as, I'll bring my report back up a second. I could have added those notes perhaps as an additional text grid possibly. So in fact, there's my chart. I could have added an extra sort of information window or maybe an extra text grid and put those notes in there instead. And there's advantages, as I said, for both. The benefit of it being in a separate instruction is that it gives you a bit more flexibility about how you're going to format it. So let's pretend that this table actually only went maybe across to here. You might decide that you wanted these notes at the side, but notes which are built into the actual table or chart like I've got today will always appear underneath. So yeah, it gives you the option to pop them on the side. It would also give me the option, earlier we used conditional inclusion where we had different images. So if I had it as a separate sort of information window, I could actually build 3 slightly different messages. One which might pop up if it's good data, one that pops up if it's slightly negative data, and one pops up if it's somewhere in between. So I could have 3 different messages with all sort of different text in there. But of course, when the report is run, only the relevant message would pop up. So yeah, certainly benefits to having it as a separate instruction. The benefits of keeping it as I've done today is really simplicity more than anything else. It means that it's only one instruction in the report, which means if I need to drag that down and put that somewhere else, I'm only dragging one thing, as opposed to if I have to remember that it's got an instruction, an information window of it that I need to drag as well. Also just means that when you're working on that note, it's all next to the table, so you're not having to kind of look at two different windows all at the same time. But yeah, the choice is yours really. But looking at my notes, again, you can see it's just cell referencing in. So R1 label, here's the speaker. We got R1, so row 1, S1, so that's that figure there. So again, just right clicking as we were before and copying it, pasting it. But towards the end of this statement, we're actually doing some calculations. So again, I'm just going to pop back into the PDF. So yes, it's looking at the 326 and the 414, but you can see it's worked out what the difference between the two is. So the 0.88. So if I look at that cell reference, double click, and it's just doing what you might do with a calculator. It's basically taking the data from row 1 S1 minus, so just using the minus key. So minus row 4 S1. So anything you can do with a calculator, you can do in here. So if you wanted to times, it's a star. If you wanted to add, it's the plus. / is the divide. The minus key is the delete. Sorry, the takeaway. So yeah, we're doing some simple calculations, but then actually what I've also done is then work out as a percentage, what is that different? So yes, 0.88 is actually a 21% or 21.3% lower. So 4.14 is 21%. Sorry, 3.26 is 21.3% lower than 4.14. So it's actually interrogating the data rather than just giving data. So again, let's have a look at that calculation. So I've just got a number of different sums. So basically take that figure minus that figure, and I pop that in brackets because that's my first calculation. I'm then dividing it using the / by that figure again. Again, popping the entire thing in brackets because that's my next calculation. And then to turn it into a percentage, I've just times it by 100. And today I wanted 1 decimal place. So as I said, this is all about not just displaying data, but actually interrogating data and giving some meaning to your figures. Now, as I mentioned, if I had done this as a separate note, then we could put conditional inclusion on this. So keeping it simple, as I said, if I had 3 statements, I'd have one which statement popping up if it was a good result, one which pops up if the data wasn't favourable, and then another one potentially popping up if it was somewhere in between. Now, just to finish off, just to have a brief discussion about what's happening at the top, where we've got the filter and the context. So the context has got the name of my main question in their venue, and that's telling Snap to run this report 4 times. So 1 for each of the different venues, so Manchester, Bristol, Edinburgh, etc. The filter is then saying every time it's run for number 1, make sure you filter it for number 1. And when it's run for number 2, make sure it's filtered for number 2. So the bit that I've got highlighted blue will just be replaced with whatever number the report is being run to. So to confirm, if I didn't have the filter in there, I would still get 4 reports, but actually those would be unfiltered reports. So I'd get 4 identical reports, each with the full sort of 321 people, rather than a specific bespoke report for each venue. Now, before I do run the report, I'm just going to take you into the first page layout, and you can see I'm going to start a new page. So every time this report runs, so there's 4, ultimately it's going to run 4 separate reports or 4 reports. Each report's going to start on a new page, and it's actually going to create a separate PDF as well, rather than one giant PDF. Just to make it a bit nicer, I've actually named the PDF, so I'm naming it venue report, but then I've got some dynamic text, so just delete that, just insert variable field. And if we grab the main question venue, and it's whatever the context is at the time that that report is run. So when it runs for number 1, which I think was Bristol, it will say venue report Bristol. When it runs for number 2, which is probably Edinburgh, it will say venue report Edinburgh. So I will run this one now, and this time I will actually run it rather than just preview it. It's going to create my 4 reports. Obviously, if you had 55 venues, it would run 55 for you. So you can see it's named the first report London. So I'll just save that to my desktop. Next one, Manchester. Now today I'm having to sort of press save each and every time on my PDF writer, but I could go into the settings of my PDF writer and just make it auto save, because obviously after a while it can get a bit annoying. Yeah, I got my 4 different reports. Obviously all the data's changing on them, and if I go onto my desktop, you can see I've got my actual named 4 PDFs. Now, in today's example, I've been talking about filtering the entire report. So the entire content of this report is filtered based on the different venues. And for a lot of occasions, that's perhaps all that's required. But you might have a need to filter on additional questions as well. So if I press play and click on filter and context, I can then perhaps filter on a date range. I can choose the 1st of March to the 23rd of March. I'm actually going to do that today because I haven't got enough data to demonstrate that today, but I will filter on perhaps an age category. Then press play or preview. So now all my data has been filtered based on the different age categories. Obviously I haven't got as much data now, but it still works in exactly the same way. I've still got my 4 different reports. If I were to look at a slightly different report, if I look at report number 3, this one's got a couple of additional filters at the top. So we'll start off with the normal venue equals venue at context, but you can see I'm also filtering on month equals month at context and year equals year at context. Now, just notice that I haven't got the word venue in the context, so this time I'm only going to get the 1 report based on whichever venue I want to run this report for. So I can go into the play button and context. So this time we're not going to worry about filtering it, but we're going to apply a context instead. And I can specify that I want to run the report for Glasgow. I want to run it for January and perhaps 2021. So in this example, because I've not got the context there, it's going to give me 1 report based on the information that I wanted. Again, I'm not going to have much data in here, but get the idea. But as you can see, I don't get any other reports, just Glasgow this time. Now, those options of being able to go into filter and context, they are there because I went into my report and I defined an external filter. So basically I said that I wanted to filter on the age question and also id.date question. And for the context, I wanted to better choose the venue and the month and the year. And the month and year, by the way, they are just extra derived variables I've created. So one on month, which is based on the sort of hidden data question id.date. So if the id.date month was number 1, that's January, etc. And the year is based on id.date year. So that just gives me the option to then, when I run the report, so that I can choose my filter and context from here. It also means the reason it's called, I'll close that one down. The reason it's called an external filter is basically because it's actually more designed so that when you run your reports in Snap Online, you can also filter based on just simply ticking boxes rather than having to say things like venue equals 1, venue equals 2. So again, if you've got colleagues or clients running reports in Snap Online, they're not sort of reliant on knowing how to filter in Snap. They can just tick boxes. Depending upon your requirements, there are different ways to use sort of these filters and context. As I said, today I've filtered the entire report, but it may be that you need some things on this report to be filtered and not others. So let's perhaps take an example where this was maybe a larger report, where the first couple of pages you wanted to filter based on a particular date range, so a month and a year, but you didn't want to actually filter on the venue. So maybe, as I said, it's a larger report. Page 1 and 2 is just a general report based on the organisation as a whole. So it's not specific to any particular venue. It's all the data for that particular month. So you'd actually just filter on month and context and month and year at the top. We would remove that, and instead, let's pretend pages 3 and 4, so a bit further down the page, maybe page 3 or 4, wherever that might be, that's where you want to start filtering your data based on an individual department, area, or whatever. So in my case, venue. So 2 ways of doing it. One would be to go and find the original chart that you wish to filter, and then just apply the actual filter to that individual chart. So yes, everything, the actual report will be filtered on days and months, or years and months. This, when it gets to this chart though, it will also be filtered on what the venue was. Okay, but you just need to bear in mind again that this table or chart may well be used in other reports where you don't want it filtered. So as I said, I know for sure that that table is in this report and that report. It might be that yes, I want it filtered in that report, I don't want it filtered in that report. So if that was the case, actually you wouldn't apply it to the individual table and chart. You would instead go and find that table or chart in the report, so number 51, and filter it here instead. So it was filtered at the moment that that table and chart is run, as opposed to being sort of permanently filtered. So yeah, different places you can filter. You can filter the entire chart, you can filter an individual table or chart, or you can filter any of these items or executions. Okay. Now, so yeah, there's lots of different ways to sort of make use of filters and context, and depending on your requirements. I'm not going to be going into them all today. In fact, I haven't obviously gone into them all today, but if you have a look at our support hub, there's a lot more detailed information on there relating to the uses of context, and also benchmarking, and that's another way to sort of filter and compare your data. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little introduction into creating smart reports in Snap XMP, using dynamic text and conditional inclusion to bring your reports to life, and also really engage with the reader. As mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on our support hub over the coming days. And on screen now, there are a couple of QR codes. So the one on the left will take you to part 1 of this webinar. So certainly, if you haven't watched that one, I'd definitely recommend watching that one as well. The one in the middle will take you to our main support hub, which has got lots and lots of, it's got a whole section to do with reporting, so particularly sort of benchmarking as well, and more uses of context. And then if you wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes just to quickly fill in our short feedback, that's the survey, that's the QR code on the right. Thank you very much for joining me, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.